I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. This week, my interview with the driving force behind New York City's post-9/11 transformation, former New York City Deputy Mayor Dan Doctoroff. Dan oversaw approximately 100 major projects for the city during his tenure as deputy mayor under Mayor Bloomberg, including the High Line and Brooklyn Bridge Park, before turning his attention to fighting ALS after his diagnosis in 2021. But first, it's now been barely 2 weeks into President Trump's presidency. Already, he's dismantled federal agencies, purged career government officials, and reshaped government through unilateral actions that have thrown Washington into chaos. Times Chief White House correspondent Peter Baker has been documenting it all. Peter, thanks for joining us. And tell me, is President Trump following the Nixon madman strategy, kind of riling foes, proposing weird things like golf courses in Gaza to hide the fact or obscure the fact that he has given everything to Benjamin Netanyahu that he wanted, to not focus attention on all the things that he doesn't want us to see by making us look at some of the weirder things that he seems to be doing?
Well, look, first of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a wild time here in Washington, no question about that. He is moving on so many fronts, so aggressively, so quickly, that I think everybody's head is spinning. How much of it is a strategy and how much of it is just, the way he is operating this time? Well, everybody is kind of guessing, right? Does he throw out this idea about U.S. occupation of Gaza, ownership, his word, of Gaza? At the same time, Elon Musk is raiding federal agencies and threatening to shut them down and fire people en masse. Which one is supposed to distract from the other? It's hard to say, right? But he does seem to be hitting on all cylinders all at once. A lot of his people who voted for him wanted him to be a disruptor. Well, this is what disruption looks like. And it's, I think, even more extensive and even swifter and even more relentless than even some of his critics expected.
On foreign policy, I thought he was supposed to be sort of an isolationist, and yet we have sort of meddled, at least rhetorically, in Greenland, Panama, Canada, Gaza. Where does he stand?
Yeah, I think the isolationist phase of the Trump era is over, and we're into the imperialist phase, right? You're absolutely right that he ran for president in 2016 on the idea that we should be focusing on folks at home, America first. That was his slogan, adopting it from the isolationists of the 1930s. And that meant getting out of the Middle East. That meant ending the Iraq War. That meant ending the Afghanistan War. That meant, stopping spending money overseas. Even now he's talking about stopping money for Ukraine, and this idea of shutting down the USAID is to stop the spending of foreign aid on fighting disease and poverty around the world. But he also, at the same time, has this sort of seemingly contradictory aspiration to increase U.S. territory, as if he was a 19th century manifest destiny leader. He's talking, as you rightly say, about taking over Greenland, pressuring Denmark to surrender the island to him. He's talking about retaking the Panama Canal, which was given back to Panama in the year 2000. He's talking about Canada becoming the 51st state, and now this idea of Gaza becoming a U.S. occupied zone. It's something nobody actually, I think, had quite had on their Trump bingo card for a second term.
One of the things he didn't talk about was ending the war in Ukraine. Whatever happened to that?
Well, remember, he said two things about that. First, he said he would do it in 24 hours because it would be that simple, because everybody would simply do what he wanted him to do. And secondly, he in fact wouldn't even wait, because there's so much death and destruction there, that he would do that even before he became president. He said he would solve the Ukraine war as president-elect. Of course, he did not do that, and it's been much more than 24 hours. In fact, obviously, the Ukraine war is far more complicated and far more difficult than he told the voters it would be. Whether he knew that or whether he was, unknowing is up for debate, I suppose. But the idea that Ukraine was simply going to surrender, or that Russia would simply take Trump's instructions, was always a fanciful idea. Nobody was any experienced in the region, and I lived there for 4 years, never thought that was possible. But once again, we have a situation where he makes these grandiose promises that he can't keep.
Who's running the government, Peter? Elon Musk or Donald Trump?
Well, that's a great question. Certainly, the big question here in Washington. Elon Musk is the one who seems to be, making a lot of decisions. Trump has had to say several times now publicly, "Well, all decisions are still have to be run by me, and he can't do anything more than I want him to do." But you can see there a little tension, right, between Trump, who always intends to be the most dominant player in the room, and Elon Musk, who is acting as if he had been elected himself. So there's a lot of guessing in Washington how long that lasts. Is that a tension that's ultimately untenable? A lot of betting pools about how long Elon Musk is around before Trump decides he doesn't want to have him around anymore. But it's a really extraordinary situation, Sam. We've never seen a situation where literally the richest man in the world, a billionaire private citizen, has been brought in to basically run, anywhere he wants to go in the U.S. government, to the point that he not only is unilaterally shutting down agencies that are founded on congressional legislation and firing people who have civil service protection. He's also even got access to all the private information of the U.S. Treasury payment system, which is something that a lot of people are very upset about.
Peter, is it tension or is Musk a good foil for Trump?
Well, he could be a good foil, obviously. He's certainly a new favorite villain for Democrats who've kind of been on their back heel and just, a little bit demoralized after losing to Trump in November, now seem to be kind of rousing themselves a little bit and using Musk as their favorite target. It's easy for them, of course, to say unelected billionaire out there, taking away food from poor people while he gets richer and richer and richer, which is factually certainly the case. But it's. I think Trump also depends on Musk in part because he likes his energy, he likes his sort of can-do spirit, I suppose. He also likes his money. Trump spent $288 million, according to the latest tabulation, on Trump's election. That's an extraordinary amount of money, extraordinary. And it's useful to him if he wants, that is Trump, if he wants to threaten Republicans, for instance, to stay in line with primary challenges that could be funded by his friend Elon Musk.
Peter, we've seen policy decisions, personnel decisions. What are the practical implications of what Trump and Musk have done so far? U.S. aid merged into the State Department. Is foreign aid to countries that was already appropriated still going to go through?
Now, a lot of it doesn't seem to be going through at the moment. They have, in theory, a freeze on foreign aid. And then you've heard Secretary of State Marco Rubio say, well, but that doesn't include aid to life-saving aid, for instance. But it's very unclear to a lot of people, including the aid organizations, just what is actually still going out and what is not. And a lot of aid organizations have had to cut services, had to close down, food lines or lay off workers and that kind of thing because they're not able to access money. There are all kinds of stories about places that are experiencing famine and disease, and the aid agencies that depend on U.S. assistance are not able to serve those people at a time of need. In theory, this freeze is supposed to be a temporary thing while they figure out how USAID spends their money. But while they're figuring that out, a lot of people depend on that money and aren't getting it right now. Now, that's fine for a lot of Trump supporters. They don't think that there should be foreign aid at all. But traditional supporters of foreign aid, including Republicans, by the way, have always said that foreign aid, which is a tiny fraction of the U.S. government spending overall, is a useful tool for U.S. foreign policy because it wins friends and influences others all around the world, and it helps us get our own goals of keeping other countries stable so their people don't try to come here. And that's supposedly one of Trump's top priorities.
It's useful. In fact, as you say, we're giving a lot of money to Colombia to keep Venezuelan refugees there instead of coming to the United States. One of the things that is so shocking is the speed with which all these changes have taken place. How did the Trump administration get so revved up to be able to do this so quickly?
Well, that part is certainly a difference from 8 years ago when he first came into office, right? So when he came into office in 2017, he was the first president in our history who had never spent a single day in public office or the military. So he really had no sense of how it worked. He didn't have a clue how government worked, and it took him a while to kind of figure it out. He was surrounded by people that he didn't know or really trust, a lot of establishment Republicans or military officers or others who tried to actually discourage him from doing some of the things he wanted to do because they thought they were unwise or illegal or unconstitutional in some cases. This time around, he has the benefit of having been president for 4 years, but then a 4-year hiatus in which he and his people have had time to plan and map out exactly what they wanted to do. And he's brought people around him this time who are like-minded, see the world the same way, are not going to try to thwart him, are not going to try to stand up to him. And in fact, the other way around, are enabling him, even his more extreme or more radical ideas that were discouraged in the first term are now encouraged in the second term.
Speaking of standing up to him, where are the Democrats?
Well, they're latching on to some of the what they consider to be the overreach of Trump's early days, particularly the temporary freeze on federal grant money and loans and the shuttering of the USAID. There have been some protests outside of government offices like the USAID, and you see Democrats like Chuck Schumer out there giving speeches. But look, the problem for the Democrats is they have no tools to do anything about it other than to complain and protest, because they don't have a majority in either house of Congress, and they don't have any official power. The real action, the real conflict, the only way people who don't like Trump are going to stop some of the things he's doing is in the courts right now. And there are dozens, I think, of lawsuits already in place. He's lost in several cases already, at least in terms of temporary restraining orders. For instance, his attempt to redefine the 14th Amendment to eliminate what they call birthright citizenship. That means that anybody born in the United States is automatically a United States citizen. He tried to say the 14th Amendment doesn't actually mandate that. 2 judges, I think, so far have said that's blatantly unconstitutional. So the real action is going to be, I think, in the courts. The Democrats may provide sound bites, but they don't have a lot of power.
Will Donald Trump listen to the courts?
That's the question. That's a very good question. He did in his first term for the most part, but the second term, it's not as clear because, in fact, there, I think, is a hunger on the part of some people around Trump to defy the courts, to challenge the courts, to say, what are the courts really going to do about it? His own vice president, J.D. Vance, in 2021, I believe, told an interviewer that Trump, if he came back into office, should simply fire all kinds of civil servants, people he calls the deep state, and let the courts say he's violated the law, and then challenge the courts to say, fine, how are you going to enforce it? It harks back to the days of Andrew Jackson when he said of the Chief Justice John Marshall, the Chief Justice has now ruled, let him enforce it. Well, that would be a real constitutional crisis. If we had an executive, if we had a president of the United States who didn't follow the edicts of the courts, particularly if it gets to the Supreme Court, we're in uncharted territory, at least in the modern era.
Nobody doubts there's waste and bloat in the federal budget. Who decides how far we go in cutting it?
Well, traditionally, of course, under the Constitution, the power of the purse lies in Congress. It's up to Congress to decide what the federal government spends and what it doesn't spend. But we have turned that topsy-turvy in Washington in the last couple of weeks. Elon Musk, in effect, with Trump's blessing at least, has been single-handedly deciding that this is bad and this is good. I'm going to let this be spent and I'm going to not have that spent. That's not the way it's supposed to work. In fact, there's a law called the Impoundment Act of 1974 that put into statute the long-standing understanding that presidents can't simply simply pick and choose what spending that Congress authorizes and that they want to follow through on. So that's going to be challenged too in the courts almost certainly, and we'll see where that goes.
Thanks to Peter Baker, Chief White House Correspondent of the New York Times. Coming up, our interview with one of New York's most visionary and indefatigable figures, former Deputy Mayor and the head of Target ALS, Dan Doctoroff. I'd now like to welcome Dan Doctoroff, the visionary former deputy mayor for economic development and rebuilding. He led New York City's remarkable post-9/11 recovery, shaped iconic projects from the High Line to the World Trade Center rebuild. He transformed the skyline and streets in ways New Yorkers experience every day. He's now channeling that same determination that rebuilt the city. Doctoroff leads Target ALS, a groundbreaking research organization he founded after his own ALS diagnosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, working to revolutionize treatment for the devastating disease while continuing to advise on New York's post-COVID future. A lot of things we take for granted, not only the World Trade Center, but Hudson Yards, the number 7 line, Barclays Center, Citi Field, the new Yankee Stadium, parks on Governor's Island, Brooklyn waterfront, the East River skyline in Long Island City, and Williamsburg. Dan, welcome, and thank you so much for being able to join us.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
Absolutely. You said that in order to move the needle on New York City's future, you need to have a catalyst, you need strong leadership, you need something like a governing philosophy, a strategy, and firm execution. Do we have those catalysts now?
Partly, but we need leadership. And leadership is the most important thing. So when we did Plan NYC, the world's leading sustainability plan, and it was 127 new initiatives. Mayor Bloomberg was in favor of it. And the one thing we didn't do was congestion pricing. And last Sunday, it happened, but if Mayor Bloomberg wasn't behind it, I don't think it would happen today.
A lot of what happened was because of the plan to win the Olympics. Would those things have happened without that plan, even though we didn't get the Olympics?
No, I don't think so. We developed a plan. There was a 5-year economic development strategy, and we always felt that the Olympics was a catalyst. And when I came in to City Hall, Mayor Bloomberg gave me the authority to get all those things done. As you mentioned, Hudson Yards, Long Island City, the Greenpoint, Williamsburg waterfront, Coney Island, Flushing, Harlem. And so the Olympic plan was a catalyst for all those things. And we did Yankee Stadium, Citi Field, the Barclays Center, Fresh Hills Park, and the High Line, and Brooklyn Bridge Park, and Governor's Island. They were all originated in the Olympic plan.
One thing we didn't accomplish, for better or for worse, was a West Side Stadium. Do you still think that was a good idea?
I have mixed feelings about it. The Western railroads are still empty, and I think it would have been a catalyst for the West Side, but the opposition was too intense. And so I have mixed feelings about it.
You said we needed in the city to prove we could do something big. We finally got congestion pricing in a reduced form. Does that prove that we can still do something big?
I think so, but Governor Hochul made an important decision to let it go. I was a major advocate with her, and I think she has courage, and I think over time that not only will we generate $15 billion for the MTA, but I think congestion will reduce, and then we can replan Midtown and downtown with more pedestrianization, and that's the key to bringing people back from post-COVID.
Are you optimistic that we can bring people back to Manhattan in particular, the people who stayed at home during COVID, who are still working at home? Is Manhattan going to be like it was pre-COVID, or will it be something different?
It's something different, but I assume that people will work for 4 days a week, but with the congestion price, we have the opportunity to revamp those streets, and that will draw more people on those streets of Lower Manhattan and Midtown.
Dan, I don't want to keep you much longer, but I have two more questions. You said in an op-ed piece in the New York Times, Mayor Adams must go. Do you still think he must go? And if he must go, who should replace him?
I don't know who should replace him, but the Center of Corruption is a negative thing, and he's been indicted. I think the prosecutors are going to franchise him further, but the stench of corruption surrounding him is unacceptable.
Then target ALS. You said you hope people will be able to live with ALS, not die from it. How optimistic are you that that will be able to happen?
Totally optimist. You know, I've raised $350 million for target ALS, and we are making progress on all fronts. We have data engine that will enable AI and machine learning. We have consortia that are developing therapies. We have biomarkers that are making progress. They're up at a last annual meeting. There were 146 companies that are interested in ALS, and researchers are flooding in to the field, and that lays the foundation for treatments. We've already seen reversal of symptoms in patients, and my hope within 10 to 15 years will be that there'll be everyone lives with ALS. That's our mission at Target ALS, and I don't think it will be time for me, but one in 400 people will die of ALS, and our mission is to stop that. And I'm very optimistic that we will develop treatments, and we're already on the way.
Dan Doctoroff, former deputy mayor, thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you a happy and healthier new year. That's it for this edition of Close Up, and for the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts. And don't forget to download the CUNY TV app, where you can catch our weekly program on the go, anytime, anywhere.